Hello, welcome to Why Not Both. My name is Pam Schaefer, and I'm a musician and therapist in Los Angeles. Why Not Both is all about how our multiple passions inform our identity, and this season we are brought to you by Under the Radar magazine and produced by Laura Studeris. If you like what you hear, please make sure to like us and subscribe to us on your favorite podcast platform and come spend time with us on social media. We are at WNB the podcast, and that is both on Instagram and on Twitter. For this episode, we got to virtually spend some time with Greg from Deerhoof. We talked about really everything from politics to music, and I very much enjoyed the very beginning of this episode because he launched directly into a story starring the wonderful Justin Theroux. I hope you enjoy our chat.
Is called Justin Theroux, who is pretty famous, a famous actor. Yeah. And, also a writer, a screenwriter. He co-wrote Tropic Thunder and I think some animated movie, maybe, I forget which one, but he also directed one movie so far.
Cool.
And it's called Dedication. And he was a big Deerhoof fan, and we happened to be in Los Angeles on tour right when he was doing the final sound mix for this movie.
Oh, wow.
And there's a lot of Deerhoof in the soundtrack.
Hey!
And so I ended up staying a few extra days in Los Angeles after the tour was over, just sleeping on the couch in his hotel room to attend these mixing sessions. And the company that released the movie was Weinstein. And
oh dear.
Although Harvey himself was not present, there was an incredible, he sent minions to the session on his behalf to pressure Justin and everybody to make decisions more to his liking. Like he wanted a bunch of voiceovers in different sections of the movie to help explain it. And everyone was against it. And one big thing that happened was the minion was demanding that this voiceover be put in. We actually had spent time, an hour or two, creating a mix with the voiceover that intentionally sounded bad, so that when she arrived at the session, we could say, "See, this doesn't work at all." And then she was like, "Well, I talked to Harvey and he said you have to make it work." And then Justin went around to everybody in the room and said, "Well, do you think this voiceover works?" And each person in turn was like, "No, I think it's actually better without it." Mm-hmm. And the Pro Tools guy, the guy who was actually constructing the entire mix from a technical point of view, obviously a seasoned professional, had been in the business for decades. I had lunch with him afterwards, and he was like livid. And I'm like, "What? Isn't it good to be consulted and have your opinion, matter?" And he's like, "No, because I'm probably going to be blacklisted from Weinstein and Company at this point because I just went against their, and there's all this, there's this corporate adversarial thing that like a person like you or me never has to deal with, thankfully, that I just, when I understood the structure, of how movies often get made, where each person, it's not everybody contributing creativity, or at least it isn't typically. It's everybody is each other's enemy, negotiating for a better deal and trying to, pull one over on everybody else and get ahead and, maybe for the betterment of the, the filmed result and maybe not,
Wow. I'm imagining this all go down, and I'm imagining that sound mixer just being like, "There goes my job." There goes my life.
Exactly. But the catering was good. like you said.
Oh my God. It's so funny. I guess like growing up in LA, I hear these stories. I'm like, this seems accurate.
Right. I was shocked. I mean, I was naive. It didn't make sense to me. I just figured it was all like everybody in it together, everybody pitching in ideas. That's what he invited me to come do.
Right.
And, it was great. And I loved the experience so much, and I loved how the movie turned out. And I just thought it was such a beautiful, movie. And just to be kind of on the inside of the process was like, I don't know, it's like magic for me,
Well, and then some
but,
like you're like, it's magic and it's horrifying. And I was like, welcome to Why Not Both, where we have both here.
yeah, exactly.
I was like, that's literally, it's so funny that you say that, because that's very much like, I feel like the artistic process here. And I mean, like when you were talking about Justin Theroux, I was thinking of even like David Lynch's Mulholland Drive, which like in a lot of ways,
Exactly.
like an absurd.
That's how I knew who he was. Is when he first kind of contacted us, that movie was then new, and we were all insane fans. And I'd seen it in the theater a bunch of times, and I was going nuts. I mean, this movie was so cool, and I was really into his character.
Oh my God, I love his character in that movie so much.
Yeah, exactly. It's weird that we bring this up. I was just last night watching something on YouTube that was a Mulholland Drive behind the scenes. Somebody with a video camera, like taking video of them making it, of them making it. And, I was like sitting there watching Justin do like take 3, take 4, I was like, oh man, I miss Justin. I wonder how he's doing. But he just reached out to us and he was like, I'm a big fan. I want to do an interview of Deerhoof for Interview Magazine. And that was maybe in 2003 or 2004 or something like that. And, I mean, it was so fun to meet him. It was like a real starstruck moment,
That's so funny. I was just thinking last night about rewatching, because I was thinking, I'm like, oh, now Halloween is coming up. We all have to be inside. I'm like, what do I want to do to celebrate? And I was just like, ooh, well, I could plan like rituals to honor the dead and also watch my favorite David Lynch films.
Right on. You better plan the whole day. I mean, some of those are kind of long, right? Inland Empire, is that like 3 hours long?
I remember watching that film, and between that and like the 3rd season of Twin Peaks, sometimes I'm just like, are you punking us? But like in a great way, but I'm still watching, but I have questions.
Yeah. I have questions, right? The whole thing, it's like, it feels like a quiz. Like you have questions for him when you watch it, and he has questions for you by making it,
Yes.
It's a kind of test, And my girlfriend Sarah was just telling me a couple days ago, like, sometimes, Greg, your music feels a little bit like a quiz, and I was like, wow, is that really true? And then I thought about it. It's like, yeah, it is kind of true. I do feel like we test the audience a little bit, or the listener a little bit, or there's something funny about the. I mean, Mulholland Drive starts this way too. A very confusing start.
Yeah.
So you're sort of dropped in, and you're like, well, wait, like, where was the setting? Where was like the, comforting, like, let me understand, who the characters are, but no, it just starts with this weird jitterbug thing, this bizarre, dancing, but really abstract, where you can't see the room. And then suddenly to this older couple that you have no idea what role they play. Everything about the first maybe 5 minutes is just such a jolt, and it all seems all the threads seem unrelated. Yep. And you're trying to hold it all in your mind, and like, well, what does this car crash have to do with that jitterbug thing in the beginning? And over the course of the movie, it starts to, if you're engaged, then it starts to make sense. And especially like you or me, if you watch it several times, then it's like it even more starts to make sense. It really rewards that kind of like repetition. But yeah, the first time you sit down and like try this thing out, you're like, whoa.
Yeah, I remember it was like a pivotal moment when I was in college where I remember there was a theater that was in Tacoma, and they played independent movies. And I remember that they did play Waking Life, but before that they played Bjork's Pagan Poetry video.
Oh, I don't know that.
Oh my God. Like that video still is like one of my favorite things ever filmed. And after it, I was like, well, Waking Life, that could have been better. But then they played Mulholland Drive.
Double feature. Whoa.
It was like they had like a movie festival, and so we were going like day after day. And I remember out of all of that, like I loved New York and I loved the David Lynch, and a bunch of my friends like loved Waking Life, and I was like, I don't think we're gonna be friends after college.
Well, the number of times that people have told me that either friendships or romantic relationships started because of Deerhoof or at a Deerhoof show, or that they broke up because of a disagreement over Deerhoof, has really, makes you wonder, what in the world you're doing, I thought I was just sitting there, playing some guitar chords or like, hitting a drum beat or whatever, but it's like, it's wild to think that, the arts can become part of real life, and they can sort of like, they are like a test. You test yourself against them, and you figure out what your principles are, as a human being, and you figure out whether the myths of the work resonate with you, and you even if it's not always conscious, there's a sense that that an artistic work could save you from some kind of a disaster or a challenge, or it could embolden you, or it could inspire you, or give you strength when you're feeling kind of, beat down or something. And I don't know, I guess over the years that I've had my band, I've like only felt more and more that was true. And part of it is just the state of humanity and the world itself, feels like it's beating you down extra. And so,
2020 has been a little extra on that front.
Yeah, I know, but is 2020 going to be any less extra? It's going to be more extra. You think I think 2020 was the least fires, hurricanes, and tornadoes that the earth is going to see in the next century. It's going to be maybe the least amount of protests we're going to see, and I don't want to put them all in the same box and say they all equal bad. I mean, the protests I consider good, but they're, what is being demonstrated about is, if it's police brutality, or if it's abolition of police, or abolition of prisons, or if it's about other issues that are clearly going to come up. How about in the middle of a pandemic, we don't have Medicare for all, that will be a thing probably that, since neither of our options support it and have vocally dismissed it as silly, then unless they're receiving it, of course,
Oh yeah.
I mean, if they're receiving socialized medicine, then Trump is fine with it. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't hear him complain about his treatment at a fully government-funded hospital when he had COVID, but for everyone else, he thinks it's ridiculous. So, So I think it's just gonna keep cranking up. obviously global warming isn't, even if we were to stop extracting fossil fuels 5 minutes from now, completely across the globe, global warming would not itself start to reverse for, I don't know, I hear estimates again, like maybe something like 50 to 100 years is when it would reach its peak. There's a delay.
Right. Right.
The
Well,
global warming that we experience today, October 23rd, is the result of 40, 50 years ago
right.
inaction,
Right. Right. And I think that in a way, like, I don't know if you're into tarot at all, says the girl from LA. But it reminds me.
I know that Fall album, Palace of Swords Reversed.
Oh my God. It reminds me of the Tower card, which, like, whenever you pull that in a reading, people are like, well, shit. But it's kind of it's the card of, like, everything has to, like, fall down in a way so that then you can, like, rebuild, or that something else can take place. And so it's like watching kind of like the beginning of, like, the tumble down, where, like, it's kind of horrific to watch something, like, fall down and crumble, but you're also like, oh, after that comes, like, a renaissance. Like, after that it's, like, cyclical, where after that has to come a rebirth. It's just that right now we're in the really we're at the beginning of the messy bit.
I mean, yeah, and it's really, it doesn't sort of happen all at one tempo, because it has felt like the American empire has been crumbling for almost as long as I can remember, but especially since War on Terror, I think it became really obvious. Like, okay, if we're having to basically hold every human on this earth at gunpoint in order to get our way, in order for our economic interests to to stay where Americans expect them to be, then clearly, we show all the signs of a decaying empire. Like, if you look at empires of the past, the Dutch East India Company, or if you look at the Roman Empire, or the British Empire, the end was always signaled by most of the taxes going to the military, which is our situation now, and it's only growing. It's only grown under all the recent administrations. It was more under Bush, more than that under Obama, more than that under Trump, to where it's like something like 60% of our taxes just go to weapons, and then also when it gets like too, like they call it, over financialized. So, like, instead of that, the empire, like, making cool things, or creating technology, or I mean, in the US case, it had a lot to do with creating armaments in World War II. It had to do with creating cars, and then it had to do for a while with high-tech stuff. But at this point, our economy is mostly based on finance, private equity and whatever, Wall Street, basically, speculation. And the whole thing with the crash in 2008, it was like, our economy is a bubble now based on finance. And that's always been the sign that an empire was about to pop, in the past.
As a classics major, this is resonating very much with me.
Oh, yeah, classics. Wait, okay. Oh, well, then I have to ask, Pam, Greek or what do you call it?
I focused on Hellenistic studies.
Okay, so you're Greek. Okay, so how's your Greek? I know how to say epharisto, but that's not really ancient Greek.
Well, that's very useful, though. My ancient Greek is rusty, admittedly, because I haven't done translations in a while.
Yeah, but you don't just have conversations. Do you ever do the podcast in ancient Greek?
I did once curse at someone in ancient Greek at the Library of Ephesus because they kept repeatedly invading my personal space.
What now? Now this is the story I need to hear. I've been talking too much. Let's hear your story.
I'm like, that's why you're on the podcast now. It was quite funny. I'm like, how do I make it brief? Basically, I'm very small and very pale, and I was at the Library of Ephesus. And
Mhm.
I've noticed sometimes when I travel that being small and pale, people will notice that. And I was in, obviously it's in Turkey. And so
Yeah.
Turkish men kept approaching me and saying like, so white, because like there it's a value to be very pale because
Right.
of the horrors of colonialism.
Right.
And
And
so,
that was always such a cosmopolitan, I mean, Istanbul at least, such a
yeah,
cosmopolitan city down through
yeah.
centuries,
And so
Yeah.
there's a whole thing about like having
Yeah.
white skin there. And so like I was just trying to live my life, and this this guy kept approaching me, and I kept saying no, no thank you, no,
Whoa.
no thank you. And he kept trying to touch my arms, and
Whoa.
I finally I said to him, Vales Caracas, which means have your corpse be eaten by crows.
Wow.
It literally means you
Pulled
didn't
that
get.
one out of a bag, yeah.
Yeah, my sister was with me, and because this guy like looked at me slightly horrified, and the thing is, I said it in almost a mix of like what would be modern and ancient Greek, because in
Whoa.
ancient Greek it would be bale, it wouldn't be vale, because like that
Well,
bead.
of course. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's
I
kind
mean,
of.
I'm sure all your listeners know that already.
Oh yeah,
No
totally,
need to go over the
totally. It's much like.
grammatical finer points. Yeah.
Oh yeah, if you're going back to the
Conjugations.
phonetic alphabet that then also informed Hebrew. It's the same as like bet and vet, where it's like that's like a wow, things got real nerdy real fast.
Wait, so were you understood?
I think I was understood enough that he
Yeah.
lightly haunted and went away.
Yeah.
But like I don't know if he was just. It would be like if someone cursed at you with like something from like the Canterbury Tales. You'd be kind of
Yeah, right. Oh
like,
man, some of the best curses I've ever seen were Martin Luther quotes. Now that's not quite Canterbury Tales era, but the Martin Luther
yes.
um, just just his writings were filled with insults. My
Excellent.
brother and I, for a while, we had this idea that we really wanted to we wanted to create an app. Um, it never got past the knee slapper stage, but create an app called Comeback. And all it was, if somebody says something mean to you, you could just click a button on your phone and instantly you would have some insult ready to go, that you could say
Oh my
back to them.
God.
And then we started getting into the research of it, and it seemed like Martin Luther was some of the top insults in history, came out from his pen.
Are there any off the top of your head that you remember
None.
that were like,
No, because that's the thing. It wouldn't really work for an app. I think this is what discouraged us because they were all like a paragraph long, like really detailed. I mean, it was kind of like the one you said to the guy, but like, times five.
oh my God. It's always, I have a delay reaction usually where then like hours later, I'm like, oh my God, that's what I should have said.
Well, everybody has that. Yeah, but if you're minimal, then a little goes a long way. So
That's
you're
true.
you're doing yourself a favor in that sense. The other thing I watched last night was was Leonard Nimoy talking about playing Spock and how he realized, maybe really early on in the series, how, if he basically played nothing, then even just raising an eyebrow would be like this, seismic
Would be
event
like
on the screen.
replicably.
Yeah, which I thought was so cool.
That's a really interesting perspective, that kind of less is more, because you said something earlier that you were like, wow, I'm creating this like cataclysmic interpersonal dynamic between people when all I thought I was doing was playing guitar.
Yeah.
Sometimes the things that we think are inconsequential actually have like great consequence by sheer serendipity.
I mean, that's why I think podcasts like this are completely absurd, because it's the idea that the musician has any idea what their music means,
Right.
or how it, they might have some intention somewhere in their mind, but I mean that's just pure, conceit that they think that they might imagine that should matter to anyone else. And I'm sure you've had the experience like every musician I've ever talked to where it's like, you finish the show and to each other we're all like, wow, that we played really badly tonight, and then like maybe the band that you're touring with is like, man, that was the best show you guys have done yet on this tour. Or the audience, you're at the merch table and people are just like really, really loved it. And I was like, really?
Yeah, really that one?
Yeah.
That's one?
Or the other way around. And yeah, that you can't, there's no universal, I mean, the other thing, we did a band once in 2010, I think. We did a European tour of kind of world music festivals and venues with a gigantic band of about 20 people, about half of whom were from the Congo, like Kanono Number One and a group called Kasai All Stars, and then Juana Molina.
She's so
was in it. Yeah, it's just totally amazing. This gigantic super band, and I mean, even the people in the group who spoke the same language or came from the same country, and actually even people who came from the same country didn't necessarily speak the same language even.
Right.
In terms of the Congolese musicians didn't all speak the same language. They mostly struggled through French talking to each other.
Oh boy.
But I mean, man, you'd get off stage from those shows and it'd be like 3 people over here were, throwing a fit about how terrible the show was. And then 4 people over there were high-fiving about how wonderful it. I mean, every single show was just, there was no agreement, no consensus whatsoever on what just happened.
That is hysterically funny. I'm trying to imagine this. I'm like, every night must have just been like a terrifying and hilarious melange.
That's what it was. The most terrifying and hilarious moment that I can remember, we were playing Fuji Rock Festival in Japan, gigantic outdoor thing, so many people watching, gigantic stage, gigantic PA system. But when you have 20 people on stage and they each have their own monitor mix and everything like that, even a giant stage gets crowded really fast. And I was up on a drum riser, and at some point, I think I tried to stand up and maybe like start doing some dance move or something like that, but my foot got caught in the in one of the monitors. It was so scrunched, and then I fell over. I fell back, and like the other guys, the other drummers were like laughing so hard at me, pointing at me and stuff, and it was really funny, but it was also like really embarrassing, mortifying.
My reaction to myself falling over is to laugh hysterically, and it's not that it doesn't hurt when you fall down, but like to me, like hysterically funny that I've like failed at being upright.
Yeah, the panic reaction. Wait, so does that mean every time you laugh really hard at something I say, it's actually that it's painful and it's considered a calamity?
Panic.
Yikes.
No,
Be careful.
Right? Never laugh. No, I apparently laugh in reaction to a lot of things. Like I'm like, oh man, I would have cracked up seeing you doing that, and I probably would have cracked up had I done that. Exactly. I don't know what's wrong with me. That sounds. I'm like that.
There's things to do,
right? Like that sounds mortifying, but also like one of those moments where you're like, you know what? If I can like fall off a drum riser in the middle of everything in this Fuji Rock Festival, like probably I can do anything I want. Like that probably just gives you like invincibility powers at that point.
Yeah, the cosmic joke. Ed Rodriguez in Deerhoof, he's like that too. kind of his reaction to almost everything is to chuckle, or at least that's his first reaction. Then it gets a little more complicated after that, but the first reaction is always to laugh.
Oh,
And
yeah.
you don't know if it's because it's like as a defense mechanism or because he's uncomfortable or embarrassed or if because it really is funny or.
I'm like, all of the above.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was like, sounds like Ed and I would get along.
You ever seen the speakerphone scene in Scarface? Al Pacino, the speakerphone scene?
I've seen like selected scenes from that movie, but I've never actually watched that whole movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit tedious, but for me, to my taste anyhow. But if you do want to watch 5 seconds of the movie, you know, Greg Saunier's recommendation of which 5 seconds to watch. Speakerphone scene. Scarface speakerphone scene.
I just imagined a supercut of like your favorite 5 seconds from each film, just like on YouTube. Like this is
yeah, my favorite 5 seconds of each movie. Yeah. That's a great idea.
Oh my God. I'm like, I actually want to see that. Now I'm like, what would that be like? It's like when you make a mix for someone that like you really love and you're just like, I want you to like experience things the way I do, which of course they're not going to, but like you put all the stuff that you'd want them to experience anyway.
Yeah, and where you shorten every song to 5 seconds. Just that one chord you really like, You like that one drum fill.
Yep. Oh my God. That's brilliant and terrifying. I can imagine like a very small handful of people that would really appreciate if you gave that to them.
I mean, that's when like kind of when we're on tour, which who knows if that's ever happening again, but when I'm on tour and you got a lot of spare time sitting in the car. And sometimes that's what I do on my playlist. I don't have streaming, but I have, an MP3 collection and I just shuffle. But a lot of times I'll, the more I shuffle the same music over and over again, the more I'm like, this intro doesn't really need to be here. And I'll go in and chop off, I'll say reset the start time to, somewhere. And then it's like, this fade out goes on too long or whatever. Let me chop the end so that when it shuffles, it's closer and closer to basically, a supercut of 5 second snippets of all my favorite music,
Well, and like you were saying, it's like when you make a piece of music or when you, I don't know, one of my guests was like talking about how it's like, well, I don't know what I'm doing. It just sort of comes through me and it has like a meaning for me, but you don't know what it's going to mean to someone else. There's someone out there that's just like, this is my favorite 5 seconds of Deerhoof.
And I think that the listener has a lot of power. And I think it's not just that it might accidentally be interpreted by a listener in a way that you didn't intend. But I think that the listener can even deliberately, kind of twist or reshape, even if they do know the intention of the artist, they can still go against it. There's such a thing as irreverence, and there's such a thing as criticism or critique, or like, we don't have to accept without question everything that people of the past, decided was right from their point of view. The founding fathers. I mean, if we're talking about revolution or collapse of our empire, I mean, then that's the first thing that comes up. Is like, people always say, oh, the US is a really young country, and that's why it's going through all of this, blah, blah, blah. No, it's not a young country. It's one of the oldest constitutions on earth right now. Right. Other countries have updated their constitution or had revolutions or created new constitutions in the time since 1776 or whatever. And ours is, I think a strong case can be made that the time is very much ripe for, maybe the founding fathers whatever. They had some interesting ideas. They made an attempt to make some kind of, limited gesture towards democracy. They
Right.
also didn't believe that Africans were human beings, and they also thought that everything was tied to land ownership and property,
Right.
and that's what makes you a person. And they didn't believe that women should vote. I mean, their idea of democracy was, you know, very much not up to date and very much not fair. And and even at the best of times, it can feel here. And obviously, we've got election day coming in a few days. It's like it can feel here like, even at our best, what we're basically permitted to do is press a button once every 2 to 4 years,
Yeah.
between two choices, neither of which we like. And
Right.
it doesn't, to even put that in the same sentence as democracy, it's a bit of a head scratcher. It's like almost no participation. It's funny to actually go back to the sort of ancient Greek model, because you think that, like, I mean, at least it seems, I'm not an expert, but sometimes it seems like word comes down that in that case, it was like, no, one person, one vote,
Mhm.
and I mean, sure, that I'm describing the U.S.'s version of democracy at the best of times, but this also isn't the best of times. It's
Right.
like even that much democracy is too much for the GOP. They're like, no, let's remove a whole bunch of polling stations.
Oh my God.
Let's
Have
say
like
that
the fake ballot boxes that they
the
put up.
fake ballot boxes, oh, suddenly our voter registration website went down,
Uh,
no, we're not going to fix it. And no, we aren't giving a second chance to everybody who missed all this. And no, now we're going to slow down the post office. I mean, obvious, and, voter ID, I mean, racially based voter suppression of every kind. And
exactly.
there was that crazy thing in Texas where they shut down there was that one county
Yeah.
that's like 150 miles wide or something, where they decided to have one polling station.
Yes. Yes. I remember reading about that and I was like, what?
I mean, it's just pure cruelty. It's just trying to get people not to vote. Don't let poor people vote. Don't let black people vote. Don't let young people vote.
Right.
That's it. That's the GOP strategy. It's like, it's even where even the founding fathers were too democratic for their taste. So, yeah, I think you're right. I think, and like we were saying about the tempo, we don't know how soon it's coming, and maybe it doesn't come all at once, but certain things about 2020 have really obviously thrown everybody for a loop. Like, things that we knew were coming someday suddenly came.
Here.
At a pace that is far beyond what many people expected and
Right.
Or were prepared for.
Right.
And you always hear your whole life, oh, someday a pandemic's coming. Yeah, I know, Chicken Little, you're some doomsayer or whatever.
Right.
And then what do you know?
Well, that's my mom this year started she started calling me the Oracle of Delphi, which was really funny. I was just like, well, if we were going to be accurate, you should probably just say I'm more like Cassandra. Because,
oh yeah, exactly. Bad news only.
Exactly.
The curse.
Like no one's listening to, and then it's like, oh my God, how could anyone have foreseen this? And I'm like, it was me.
I mean, but it's also like a lot of those Cassandras in the 20th century. I feel like a lot of the Cassandras in our culture had the advantage of recording or book publishing. Yep. And a lot of their wisdom, while it was dismissed at the time it came out, or it was, I mean, as a musician, I often think of music, particularly music of oppressed populations in the US, and obviously black music being the most world famous, whether you're talking R&B or blues or, soul or disco or funk or whatever it is, jazz, hip hop, again, it goes back to this interpretation thing. It's like, well, the music industry interpreted it as feel-good music that, that wedding bands play at weddings now. You do covers of We Are Family and stuff like that. But the fact is, a lot of the wisdom and the foresight and the ability to see the future and to see difficulty that is contained in that music, is also ripe for reevaluation, and that maybe it wasn't just light pops, light entertainment, and maybe it had deep and heavy things to say, and in some cases dealt with collapse and dealt with apocalypse and dealt with revolution. I don't know, this just been on my mind recently because we just put out this thing called Love Lore that was like a medley of a whole bunch of music from the late 20th century that, we tried to like put things together in such a way that like maybe the meaning of the song is cast in a different, light or something than just if you hear that same song over and over again. So I think that I'm sort of heartened by the fact that, the Angela Davises and bell hooks, of this world are actually becoming more popular in 2020 and still alive and have some wisdom to offer. And suddenly as people are panicking, what do we do? What do we do? What's police abolition? What's prison abolition? There's someone you can turn to who's had already devoted their thought and their life, for decades to studying the data and the theory, and can be a source of something other than total confusion and panic, or just sort of reactionary, political speechifying or whatever.
Yeah, like thinking about like the difference between action and reaction.
Yeah.
That it's like, I always say this to my clients, even though it's hard to internalize, that it's like...
What, your tarot clients? What clients?
Oh, I'm also a therapist. That's
okay.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Yeah, like FYI. Like it's a strange life I'm living right now.
Sure,
but,
yeah. Wow.
Yeah, but we talked a lot about what?
Multifaceted.
Yeah, hence the thesis of the podcast, really. That's why it was funny that I was like, all kind of backwards into this, because I was like...
I'm wondering when the podcast is going to start. What's your first question?
This podcast is really, in a way, like on beautifully off the rails, because like there's no rules in quarantine times. I don't have
exactly
anymore. I'm like, it's my podcast now.
Right on. Wait, so okay. I interrupted. Tell your story, your client.
That's so funny. No, with my clients, we talk about how we make decisions based on the information and feelings that we had at the time. Right. And that like over time we gain more information and we might gain wisdom about our feelings, and we might feel differently and we can make different choices. And so to have compassion for where we were, but be like, that doesn't preclude us from going somewhere else. And that reminded me of what you said about like our country in general, where it's like, we were going, like the founding fathers had a lot of ideas that I frankly think are wrong, but that was the information that they had at the time. That was like their cultural information, which I think is terrible, but like, that's what they had to go off of. And so it's like, they were acting on what they had. And it's like, we have so much more now. Look at how many options we have. We could make so many different choices now. Yeah.
I think that principle can also be abused. And even in the Founding Fathers' day, there were people who were opposed to chattel slavery. I
True.
mean, yeah. And it's not like they were forced to choose that, or to invest in that, or to support that, or to engage in that. From the very beginning of slavery.
I don't give them a free pass. They were
good.
I'm not like, oh my God, they were great. It's more like, no, you were kind of weak-minded and went with like the dominant cultural ideas that you had at the time. Like, okay.
I wonder what you think. I mean, that being the case, do you have an opinion? Like we mentioned Harvey Weinstein earlier, and he's, one of modern times most
biggest,
darkest examples of a person who was rightfully canceled and was therefore lost his job and lost his standing and his reputation and his ability to interfere with the editing of sound mix of any more movies. And but like, if you had Harvey Weinstein as a client at some point, what is the role of like the person, the human being still exists. Yeah. They're still there. What are the possibilities of taking the approach you just described? It's like, well, you made some poor choices based on, your feelings, needs, knowledge, understanding, and limitations at the time. You have different ones now. Not that he's done any of this. He pled not guilty to everything, but if he were to try to be accountable and to try to make some effort towards the healing of the victim, then, to what extent, I don't know. That's just something I've been thinking about recently. And it comes up when one is thinking about prison abolition. Well, it's like, what about some of the, are some of these people unforgivable? Is Donald Trump unforgivable? And is that a taboo question to even ask?
Well, and then it's like it's not, for instance, someone like Trump or Weinstein. It's not on. In a way, it's outside of their sphere for someone else to forgive them. Like, that has to be someone else's.
Very true. Yeah.
And so it's like, if I were working with someone like that, it would be looking for the capacity for them to empathize and forgive themselves and make different choices, and whether they wanted to do that, because trying to face the horror of harming that many people would be terrifying, I would imagine. Like, I'm not a megalomaniacal monster, so I don't go about harming people at that rate. So I'm like, I don't know what that would be like. I feel terrible when I accidentally say something by accident that like hurts my friend's feelings. I'm like,
exactly.
I don't know what that would feel like. That would probably be like ego destroying. And so, I think in a way that's why like people like this don't, plead guilty or things like that, because can you imagine?
Right. It's just to face it.
For that, like that would be terrifying. And so, in a way, I think the forgiveness is then like, I frankly, I work more with the people who harm has been done to them than who have done harm.
Right,
and
exactly.
So it's like working with people about like how to let that harm go, or how that harm transformed you, because it's something that was inflicted upon you. It's not something you chose, and that's not a choice you made. So it's like, well, what do you do now that it's here? And so that's something I work with, but it would be interesting, because occasionally clients will come to me that they feel guilty that they've done something. And we work with like how to make that better with them, but also with the acknowledgement that like you can't control what the quote like victim of your actions is going to think or do, or whether they forgive you or not. Because that's up to them. Like that's their thing. But at the same time, there's something in you that makes you make those choices. And unless you face what the repercussions are and whether you care about those repercussions, that's the thing is like some people simply do not care about the repercussions of their actions. And nothing you can say makes them care. Like they simply don't. And at that point, it's like, I do think that in some ways, like aside from the prison system, I think that ostracizing people, like that seems like a logical consequence to me. When people,
Yeah,
oh my God,
exactly.
why have I been deplatformed? I'm like, well, that's a consequence of saying awful things. That's like,
Yeah.
yeah, that's, if someone's running around a party insulting people, you're going to ask them to leave the party. You're not going to be like, well,
Right.
that's just the insulting guy. Like, gotta, like,
Right on.
And so I do think that there is like harm reduction through ostracizing, and that can teach people like, hey, that's not the way.
Yeah. To
But
shun,
yes,
to shun people from
yeah.
participation. Yeah.
Yes, and that that I think is in some ways more painful, and that's
Right.
why, like, as a consequence, can sometimes be almost more effective, because like you don't get to hang out with anyone anymore.
Yeah, right, exactly. Do you think that like you said, you can't make somebody feel empathy, or you certainly can't force them to. You can
No.
ask over and over again. You can beat them over the head. You can comment on their Facebook post, with ever increasing aggression, and somehow they're still not feeling more empathy. But do you think that? Do you ever think that the arts may actually play a role in the opening up of the possibility of empathy inside of a person? Reading a novel about characters and starting to care about those characters, or listening to music and having it, the human voice, starting to identify with that voice, as you sing along, or as your emotions are stirred by it.
Oh, completely. Whether that
Yeah.
applies to your actions, like I have no idea, but like I think that I do think that definitely people have expressed to me, at least in many spheres of conversation, like extremely personal, emotional experiences with the arts. Like
Yeah.
no matter who they are, no matter what they do, like whether it's music or whether it's there's, like you said, like in a novel that they really identify with someone, whether
Right.
even like there are some people that have expressed to me that they really enjoy reading nonfiction and they get like so into like the experience of others that they're reading about.
Yeah, that's like me.
You're like, hello,
Yeah.
me.
Yeah,
I do
I
think
think
that,
so.
yeah, I think that
And I
as
think that's the reason we got to keep going. You keep making your synthesizer music and your Ableton and stuff. I'm gonna keep
oh,
writing some songs. I'm gonna keep playing the drums, even if we can't tour right now. We're just gonna keep it up.
well, yeah, because then it fosters empathy with yourself, and then it fosters, which is
Ooh,
a weird thing to say, but it's like,
yes.
yeah, like you start having more empathy for your own experience, because we're all going through a really very strange experience right now.
It's a strange experience, and it's also, I was talking a couple months ago to a friend of mine called Wadada Leo Smith, with whom we released a live album this summer. And he was saying, like, oh man, quarantine's been so great for me. I get up in the morning, I make myself a little food, and I go to work. I'm writing music. And I have no interruptions. And when I get hungry, I make some more food, and then I go to bed, and then I get up early again the next morning. And it's not just that it's strange right now, but there's also this possibility, or this, opportunity to go really deep, whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, to familiarize yourself, with some part of yourself that normally you kind of skirt over this, over the surface.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I don't know, there's just all this time where you're having to face yourself. Or if it's like two people living together, that's the situation I'm in with Sarah. It's like,
Yeah.
the relationship becomes a lot deeper, because it's like we pretty much only have each other to interact with,
Yes.
in person.
Yes.
And so it's like, it's also been strangely, I don't know, for me, it's been like, it's had a lot of, it's been like, it felt kind of tragic. All our tours got canceled, obviously. And, prospects for future tours seem really iffy, It's not just a question of whether some governor says, okay, open that bar back up. It's a question of, well, wait a second,
Yeah, like, are you putting yourselves or others in danger by doing that?
Yeah, exactly. And if everybody's going to be standing 6 feet apart, like, and not allowed to dance or something, first of all, is it just going to be a huge money loser unless we charge $100 to come see Deerhoof?
Right.
If you can only get that many people into the size club, and then there's the question of any of these clubs going to be in business. I mean, we're just watching them drop, one by one. The circuit that we would normally have played over all these years, it's like many of those venues just gone. That's it. And there's, more to come, undoubtedly. And, the government has not seen fit to prevent that. They don't see that as one of the bigger priorities. The bigger priority is, make sure that the CEO of some airline, gets a bonus this year, can buy a new yacht or something. So as touring, seems iffy right now, isn't a thing, and it seems iffy about when and if it may ever return. Yeah, you kind of turn towards a little bit inward and recording and writing, and in a weird way, there's been a certain rewarding quality to like focusing in that direction, even though it feels really, I really, really miss everything about touring, seeing my bandmates and being on stage, the high that comes with that. And also maybe more than anything, just the randomness of it, the random interactions with total strangers is kind of, I think, the thing I miss the most, weirdly. It's not the reason that we ever said, hey, we should go on tour, or hey, I want to be a musician so I can have random interactions with strangers. But that just came to be the way that I do have interactions with strangers. And you never know what's going to come up in conversation. You never know what somebody's going to hand you or talk about or react to, something that happened during the show, and those are the things, that's like the nourishment, that feels like it's sort of missing right now.
Well, that sounds like kind of like redefining your relationship with music and also with connection to others. Like those two things seem very much in flux right now.
Yep. Well, it's good we could have this podcast to practice interacting on this level.
I said that on a post recently, that I was really excited that people were listening, but also like it felt very selfish in a way that I'm like, I get to like once a week at least talk to someone else, like have a really just focused, straight up, just human interaction. Just be like, here's this human being that you get to talk to. How exciting. That's like, and that's literally all that this time is dedicated to, where it's like, oh, what's this person's experience? And that to me is like, I'm like, what a joyful rarity right now. Because you're like you're saying, like, even whether you're touring or whether you're playing local shows, like there's like that sharing aspect of music. And I say that as like a very shy studio rat. But it's like, even the magic of attending other shows. You never know really what's going to happen at a show.
Right, exactly.
And that's one thing that makes them so magical.
Yeah, right. I mean, particularly when you're on our level and the shows aren't huge. I mean, when they get really huge, they become a little bit more predictable. And they're a little bit, they feel a little bit, when you're in the 200th row, of an arena or a stadium, night after night, the show can be extremely similar. But when you're playing like smaller venues, it is utterly different from night to night. The venue itself is totally different, in the next town or whatever. The size, the shape, the layout, the PA system, the shape of the stage. And if you're really that close to the audience, it's not just some amorphous blob. It's like, you see individuals. And the personality and the scene in every city is different. And
Yeah.
you certainly miss that. But yeah, I really relate to what you're saying about the weekly thing. When the album we put out in, well, I don't know, it was like maybe May or April or something.
Time.
Yeah, it feels like 10 years ago. We did an album called Future Teenage Cave Artists, and leading up to that release, the band and the label, our label Joyful Noise, we did Skype calls every week, to get ready, to prepare. Like, we planned out doing a online listening party, and we were working out like which song should have a video, or how to word the bio, or all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
All the PR stuff. But then once the record came out, we were like, let's keep having the meetings. And to this day, it's like we're still doing the meetings every single week, and it's just like so great to be able to touch base with each other in the band and with the label, and just kind of brainstorm. We don't have an album coming up, but we're starting to, we're working on a new one now. It's not to the point where the label needs to be, fine-tuning the press campaign or anything like that, but still it's fun to have them in on the ground floor and to be brainstorming with them. In other words, the exact opposite of that Weinstein experience I was describing, where everybody's an adversary. This is like, the label's allowed to chip in with brainstorms, about an album that hasn't even been recorded yet, and it's really fun to have developed a trusting relationship, working relationship with certain people, where you actually want them. It's like fun for everybody to be like in on the process right from the beginning. It's cool.
Yeah, and that's like, I love that you said that it's like you trust people. It's like when you're writing with your bandmates, it's like you trust each other with your ideas.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
You're gonna kind of like be like, okay, I can toss something out, know that it's safe.
Right.
And that's cool that I'm just like, it's like you expanded your party. Well done.
I would say that the process of Deerhoof's existence has been to trust more and more. Like, so that when each of us writes a song or has an idea or plays something and then sends it to everyone else, I think we're less and less scared, that we might have exposed too much or done something too silly or too far out or whatever, or not meeting expectations. Like, I think that's been such a, I feel really, really grateful. And it's partly just the nature of my bandmates, the people that they are, but that's been the process. It hasn't been that we've narrowed down or decided on a style or on a method or, or a hierarchy or anything. It's just for people who have gotten closer over the years and, aren't afraid to basically to fall down, trip over something, fall down, to make a mistake, to suggest a silly idea. They aren't offended when somebody else says, no, I don't like that idea. We just have the flow is more fluid and open now than it ever was. And I don't know how that happened, but it's really cool.
That's awesome. That is so cool. That is, because normally I ask, like, what advice would you give? And I'm like, no, like, find people that you can do that with. Sounds like to
right.
me, like,
I mean, in a way you don't really know, because it's like we've had the band for, I don't know, 20 some years. It's like you don't really know what each person might turn into. You were describing earlier about the past person and what they felt, what they knew. You don't know what they're gonna know in the future, and whether you will still be compatible. And it's kind of like a miracle if these updated versions of ourselves still have a way to interact with each other. And it's not just out of habit, but each of us is changing.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm a lot different as a person than I wouldn't have wanted to do a podcast in 1994 or whatever when I started the band. It's like I was much too shy and didn't feel like I had anything to say. I was really secretive about the music I was making and the process involved and everything. It's just like changed so much. Yeah, I'd say the same thing about Satomi and John and Ed. Like, they're very different people than when I first met them, and yet, somehow we're still like making things with each other, and it's cool.
I like how you put it, that it's like the updated versions of yourself, like all kind of like mesh and coalesce. And I'm like, that's a great way to put it, because no one stays static for 20 years.
Exactly.
That would, well, if you do, that's probably not a great thing.
Well, yeah, I think some bands feel pressure to stay static, or they feel pressure from labels to be like, like churn out another hit like you did in blah, blah, blah. And that will inevitably, cause the band to feel a lot of stress, and make it a lot less fun. And somehow, I think I'm grateful for our fans, because they've always allowed us a lot of room to surprise them or surprise each other, and to do something different than what we did. Like when you said that you started out as like singer-songwriter on piano with a band, and then you switched to synthesizers, and it's like that shift, or that transformations can be welcomed, is like incredible. And I think it really is huge. I mean, maybe like the last thing I want to say, that has to do with the election again, is that, one of the reasons that, like, I think I've already made it clear, in this podcast, that I'm not really an enormous fan of Joe Biden, but one reason that I feel strongly about voting for him rather than Trump is the fact that he, at least a few times, has shown a glimmer of hope that he can change his opinion on something.
Yes.
He's not the most transformational figure, obviously, even in politics, let alone, humanity. But compared to Trump, who seems to be very set in his opinions, and they haven't altered. And in fact, his own faithful, his own fans are clearly people who love to be dominated and people who love to be dictated to, because the reason they love him is that he will never cave to any pressure from anyone. It's his fixedness. He's like just a statue. He'll never change. He'll never bend. He'll never have empathy. He'll never listen. He'll never be convinced by a more logical argument. Nope. He's just going to be what he is. And some people who want domination, who are comfortable or who love being dominated, I guess, are fans of that, and get excited when they see someone like that. But for the rest of us, for most of us, our only hope. I mean, we were talking about survival issues at this point. Our only hope is for, if it must be a politician whose platform you disagree with, which is Joe Biden in my case, then you hope for someone who can change and show signs that they can update themselves, and that maybe Joe Biden wouldn't author the crime bill in 2021 that he authored in 1994, and that maybe he doesn't still hold the same. He's not like some budget deficit Republican, basically, who's always worried about he used to talk about cutting Social Security because it wouldn't balance the budget and stuff like that. And I think even just last night in the debate, I feel like he'd come around a little bit, like he mentioned the founding fathers, and he said that it's okay to do deficit spending if when the misery in the population requires some help, and obviously that's exactly where we're at. And you've got one candidate who's saying, no, we will not. I mean, of course, that's untrue. The GOP creates greater deficits than the Democrats over and over in every single administration. But at least the talk is, budget all the time with the GOP,
Right.
and we're inflexible. And yeah, in other words, it's Joe Biden's weakness and his kind of pandering quality that I consider to be the only hope right now, is that he may actually cave in to public pressure, which I hope starts the day after Election Day and is just unrelenting and really strong. We obviously need Green New Deal. We need Medicare for all,
Yeah, and it's almost like a metaphorical, like he kind of reminds me of those little wedges that you put on the floor to like keep the door open.
Yeah.
It reminds me of that. Yeah, like I love that I couldn't think of the word doorstop. Cool work there.
Well, what's the ancient Greek word for it?
Right? ADHD is a magical condition in which you can do extremely complicated things well and then simple things very poorly. But he reminds me of that, where it's like he's that little wedge that keeps the door open, where it's just like, is this the magical portal? No.
Right.
Is this the wedge where we can just sneak on in there?
Yeah.
Yes. And I think that you spoke to something that I think in American culture very much confuses me, and which I hope to change, ironically, saying change and not, but it's like that people perceive change as weakness, whereas I perceive change as strength. I perceive
transformation is
Yes,
and that's a Thoreau stuff too. I mean, it's like not being fixed, not like I am this person. It's like, no, you're changing into this person today, or in reference to this question, and yeah, I totally agree. Not to interrupt you, I agree that transformation is like a big part of why I'm a musician, or why I have Deerhoof, why Deerhoof is the way it is. It's like, it's always the looking to transform or to update or to resurrect yourself, from the ashes, from the rubble,
Yeah. Because everything is cyclical. It's like I firmly, that I'm like, I'm talking about change and saying I firmly believe something. It's more like I very clearly often see the light and darkness and don't think that they're mutually exclusive. It's like,
right.
Both of those forces are in there. You're going to cycle amongst them. Go for it.
Yeah, own it. Like Jung says, owning your own shadow.
Exactly.
Yeah. Which is why we play with lots of distortion.
I probably just distorted shriek laughing into my microphone.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
You think we've given them enough, Pam?
I feel like
we're at an hour and 26 minutes.
Oh yeah. Well, don't worry. I'll edit out a lot of my ADHD tangents.
No.
Oh, you've been very generous with your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thanks for the chat.
Thank you again for listening to this episode of Why Not Both. If you liked what you heard, please make sure to like us and subscribe to us on your preferred podcast platform. You can also come hang out with us on social media. We are at WNB the podcast, both on Instagram and on Twitter. This season, we are brought to you by Under the Radar magazine. Under the Radar is a nationally distributed print, music, and entertainment magazine and website. You can find them at www.undertheradarmag.com, and feel free to support them on Patreon. Extra special thanks to our producer, Laura Studeris, who is literally a rock star. Thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you next episode.